briefly, can you all hear me? Good. Why we've ended up at Chitungizwa Art Centre for this project. So, in a way, it's got a deep history, but it started in Cape Town, where the students protested against a statue of Rhodes, which was on the campus there. There were a number of students from Southern Africa, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and all around the world who started a support movement in 2015 at the University of Oxford, which attracted widespread support within the university, particularly amongst the students. Why is the question, and I think the answer is that the relationship between Oxford and Africa has not ever really been resolved. Especially money from the mining industry in South Africa, from Zimbabwe and from Zambia, has funded significant aspects of Oxford University. At Oriel College, it funded a building. It funded scholarships, which you may say, yes, included some Southern Africans, but the great majority of those scholarships, the famous Rhodes scholarships, went to the United States. The biggest beneficiary of the Rhodes will, the money that came from Southern Africa, was the United States of America, because Rhodes thought it was politically wise in 1902 to try and bring the US and Britain closer together. There was no thought, really no thought, of that money benefiting higher education and other projects on any scale in South Africa. If the amount of money that had gone into Oxford University had gone into universities then in the early days, but already starting in Southern Africa, it would have made a really big impact. The other thing, of course, that I need to say is that the money in Oxford, the Rhodes scholarships, were not available to black people until the 1970s. So for the first 60, 70 years, they were racially segregated. These are just a few of the reasons why students at Oxford and some significant number of staff felt something needs to be done, because the Rhodes legacy had always been praised in the university. Generous man of his time, and so on. He didn't, it is true, ask for a statue to be put up in the high street, but the college decided to do so. And this was then became the big issue. You could say a lightning rod for issues of race, equality, opportunity in the university as a whole. The university is an open university. Nevertheless, access for people who've had, because it is so difficult to get into university, those who've had education at the school and undergraduate level of the very highest quality in the most elite institutions tend to be those who can get into university. So this was another big issue for the students and staff, to try to equalize entry. And then in addition to that, the statue as a symbol of a past that was seen not yet to be resolved, not yet adequately to be resolved in terms of discrimination, of the money coming to Britain, and not yet in terms of student entry, and not yet in terms of what was taught. I must be careful here, because I started an African Studies Centre, at the University of Oxford, and we have taught many postgrad students, particularly some undergrad, and we have a large number of doctoral students, including a significant number of Zimbabweans, I should add. Nevertheless, the syllabuses within Oxford University in particular subjects, and I could say in English literature, in history, and so on, didn't adequately reflect a global approach, and certainly didn't adequately reflect the significance of Africa in British history. And that's another unresolved question that we were trying to confront. So the big protests in 2015, the university decided not to move the statue. It decided to develop some diversity projects, which have been reasonably successful. The reason is that it was too political to move the statue. This is my interpretation. Others may see it differently. There was a conservative government, and we have had what we call in Britain culture wars. Culture wars being those who are nationalistic about British history, if you want to celebrate the empire as a great achievement, and those who are more critical, who may realize and think that the history of empire has been uneven and complex. Nevertheless, on the whole, it involved a great deal of violence and dispossession and economic inequality, asymmetry of power in the world, and to a degree, the world still lives with those historical legacies. So, the statue issue became very divisive, but because there was a conservative government, they more or less said to the university, look, we're not going to defend you if you get rid of the statue. The press in Britain is 80% supportive of the Conservative government, or has been in the past. Oxford University is going to suffer if there is an attempt to remove the statue, and the Conservative government was against it. Their slogan was, retain and explain. Okay, we can acknowledge it, but retain all of our old statues and explain them. The problem about retain and explain is it usually just involves retain. The explanation tends to drift away, and that's really what happened. They refused to move the statue. I won't explain the complex politics within the university, and it's an old institution, 900 years old. They deal with problems by saying, okay, we'll let these things pass. There's a new generation of students every 3 or 5 years. The issue will become something else. It's become Palestine, I would say, as the major issue for students in the university. These things drift away. But in 2020, Black Lives Matter became a global issue, and the students and supporters came out on the streets again. And as Richard mentioned, High Street is one of the central streets in Oxford, and there were 2,000 protesters outside Oriel's back door, which goes onto High Street, literally beating at the door. And the college was deeply embarrassed. This received national and international coverage. It hadn't done anything very much. So their governing body met and decided to move the statue. The statue became a kind of lightning rod for all of these different issues that I've been mentioning, and others too. And they decided to appoint a commission to advise them on how to do it. I sat on that commission and did the historical work. And I have to say that although I had lectured about Rhodes and the colonization of Southern Africa and Africa as a whole for many years, I'd never really got into the detail of the sources that were available. And I was quite shocked. The violence that was involved, I would call it extreme violence, that was involved, with systematic burning of village after village after village, destruction of grain stores, enforced starvation, and so on. I've written a couple of articles which I'm happy to circulate, and for me it became urgent, in a sense, that the statue be moved, not destroyed, as a recognition of the University of Oxford and Oriel College should not have a statue celebrating someone who was involved in such violence. It was against the principles, the liberal principles of the university. They appointed the commission, we reported, we were divided because they put conservatives and, let's say, more people of my frame of mind more, and 4 out of 8 were black people as well. 6 were in favour of moving and 2 against. And the college then, having received our report, decided not to move the statue. And they told us the political costs to them would be too great. I'm sure I can give you an analogy with Zimbabwe or other countries, but you would think an independent institution like Oxford could do something like this. It's a symbolic act. It's not going to cost anybody any money. It's a symbolic act, but they felt they couldn't do it. There were other reasons, and so we now sit where we were. Now, that's where Richard comes in. I'm going to stop now.